The cannabis plant. Few plants sit in a legal patchwork quite as confusing as cannabis, a species that can be perfectly legal to grow in one state and a felony just across the border in the next. As of early 2026, roughly half of all U.S. states allow some form of home cultivation for adults, typically capping the count at a handful of mature plants that must stay locked away from public view, while a neighboring state can still treat that same plant count as a serious criminal offense. The confusion runs deeper globally, where countries like Germany, Malta, and the Czech Republic now permit limited home growing under strict personal use rules. Canada and Uruguay run fully commercial legal markets, and much of Asia and the Middle East still treats cultivation as a severe crime, carrying years of imprisonment. The plant itself grows as a tall, aromatic annual with distinctive serrated palmate leaves radiating outward in clusters of 5 to 9 leaflets, and female plants develop dense, resin-coated flower clusters that concentrate the compounds driving nearly every one of these legal battles worldwide. Even within legal U.S. states, cultivation rules rarely stop at plant counts, often requiring secure fencing, distance limits from schools, and strict bans on any view visible from a public sidewalk. Most jurisdictions also draw a sharp line between growing seeds, which are generally sold freely since they contain negligible amounts of the plant's active compounds, and cultivating a mature, flowering plant, which is precisely the point where personal cultivation limits and criminal penalties actually begin to apply. The opium poppy. Millions of home gardeners across North America and Europe grow this plant every single summer without ever realizing they are technically committing a federal crime. Papaver somniferum, source of morphine and codeine, is explicitly listed as a Schedule II controlled substance under United States federal law, yet the same seeds are sold openly in seed catalogs, grocery store spice aisles, and garden centers under names like breadseed poppy. Since the statute specifically excludes the seeds themselves from the ban, the plant is unmistakable once it flowers, with smooth, waxy blue-green leaves clasping directly around thick stems, and papery petals ranging from white to deep mauve to blood red, often marked with a dark blotch at the base, giving way afterward to a smooth, rounded seed capsule topped with a distinctive ring of ridges. Gardens Lab covers legal gray areas exactly like this one across every corner of the plant kingdom, with a new deep dive posted every few days into plants that carry far more legal complexity than their pretty appearance suggests. In practice, enforcement almost entirely depends on intent and scale, since federal agents have shut down large-scale operations, selling hundreds of pounds of dried poppy, while millions of small ornamental plantings and home flower beds go entirely unnoticed and unenforced year after year. The Khat Shrub. Chewed for centuries across the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula as a mild social stimulant, khat occupies one of the strangest legal gray zones of any plant on this list. In the United States, the plant's active compound, cathinone, is classified as a Schedule I substance, carrying the same legal weight as heroin. Yet the living, unharvested plant itself has never been explicitly scheduled at the federal level, leaving prosecutors and defense attorneys arguing for decades over whether simply growing the shrub in a pot constitutes a crime at all. A small handful of individual states, including Missouri and Alaska, close that loophole directly by naming the plant itself, whether growing or not, in their own drug schedules. Khat grows as a slender evergreen shrub with glossy serrated leaves and small white flowers, and its legal status flips dramatically depending on location. Fully banned across the European Union, Canada, and the United Kingdom, while remaining a legal, everyday part of social life in Yemen, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Djibouti. That stark divide has repeatedly put immigrant communities from those very countries at the center of Western drug enforcement, since a plant treated as an ordinary part of daily social custom back home can suddenly carry serious criminal penalties after a move abroad. The Coca Plant. High in the mountain valleys of the Andes, coca has been cultivated and chewed for an estimated 4,000 years, yet growing it almost anywhere else in the world today invites serious legal consequences. Under the United Nations Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, coca leaf sits on the same international schedule as cocaine and heroin, and most countries enforce an outright ban on cultivation with essentially no exceptions. Bolivia and Peru carved out a rare exception for their own citizens, legally permitting limited coca cultivation to supply long-standing local markets for chewing the leaf and brewing coca tea, treating the plant as a protected piece of indigenous cultural heritage rather than a narcotic. The shrub itself grows with smooth, oval leaves and small white flowers, followed by red berries. And while the leaf in its natural form produces only a mild, coffee-like stimulant effect when chewed, that same leaf becomes the base ingredient for cocaine once processed with industrial chemicals in illegal jungle laboratories. Bolivia has spent recent years actively campaigning to have the international community reclassify the leaf separately from cocaine itself, arguing the plant's ancestral ceremonial use bears little resemblance to the drug eventually extracted from it. Outside of that narrow legal exception, most nations enforce eradication programs specifically targeting wild and cultivated coca plants, treating even a single unauthorized bush discovered on private land as grounds for seizure and destruction, regardless of the grower's stated intentions. The Salvia Plant. Few plants highlight the strange gap between federal and state law, quite like salvia, a member of the mint family whose primary active compound remains entirely unscheduled at the federal level in the United States even today. Salvia divinorum produces salvinorin A, a uniquely potent hallucinogenic compound unlike the alkaloids found in most other psychoactive plants, and because that chemical structure never fit neatly into existing federal drug categories, the plant has simply never been formally scheduled nationwide. Individual states filled that gap themselves, and today more than half the country bans the plant outright at the state level, while it remains completely legal to grow, possess, and sell in places like Washington and California with only minor age restrictions. The plant grows as a soft-stemmed perennial with large velvety green leaves and small white and purple flowers, native to remote cloud forests in Oaxaca, Mexico, where the Mazatec people have used it in traditional spiritual ceremonies for centuries. That traditional ceremonial use continues legally today in Mexico itself, creating the unusual situation of a plant that is simultaneously protected cultural practice in its country of origin and a felony-level controlled substance just across a state line in parts of the United States, the Giant Hogweed. Towering over the riverbanks and ditches of the United Kingdom, Giant Hogweed can reach nearly 4 meters tall, and its sap causes such severe burns that simply having it in a garden triggers direct legal responsibility. Under the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981, deliberately planting or knowingly allowing giant hogweed to spread into the wild is a criminal offense in England, Wales, and Scotland, even though the plant is not automatically illegal to have if it arrived on a property naturally. The danger comes from a chemical reaction called phototoxicity, where the plant's clear, watery sap dramatically increases skin sensitivity to sunlight, and contact followed by sun exposure produces painful blistering and burns that can leave permanent scarring months later. The plant resembles an enormous, overgrown cow parsley, with huge, deeply lobed leaves stretching up to 3 meters long and umbrella-shaped clusters of small white flowers spreading up to 80 centimeters across at the top of thick, purple-blotched stems. Because the plant is also classified as controlled waste once removed, disposing of a cut giant hogweed plant incorrectly, even from private property, can itself trigger a separate legal violation entirely apart from the original planting offense. Anyone who suspects the plant has already taken root on their land faces a genuine dilemma, since the law demands the spread be stopped while also restricting exactly how the plant can be safely cut, bagged, and hauled away without breaking waste disposal rules in the process. The Japanese Knotweed. Brought to Britain in the 1850s, as a fashionable ornamental plant, Japanese knotweed has since become one of the most legally consequential plants any homeowner can discover growing in their yard. Under the same Wildlife and Countryside Act covering giant hogweed, deliberately planting or causing the species to spread into the wild is a criminal offense, and property sellers in England and Wales are legally required to disclose its presence on official property information forms before a sale can proceed. The plant's aggressive rhizome root system can extend 7 meters horizontally and 3 meters deep, strong enough to force its way through cracks in concrete, drains, and building foundations, and mortgage lenders routinely refuse financing on affected properties without a professional treatment plan and an insurance-backed guarantee in place first. Recognizable by its bamboo-like hollow stems, heart-shaped leaves, and clusters of small white flowers in late summer, the plant can grow up to a foot in a single week during peak season, regenerating from even a tiny fragment of root left behind after an incomplete removal. Research has linked affected UK homes to an average sale price drop of roughly 5%. A discount that on a typical property translates into tens of thousands of dollars simply for having this plant establish itself in the wrong corner of a garden, the Kudzu Vine. Introduced to the southeastern United States in the early 20th century as a solution for erosion control, kudzu grew so explosively that it earned the nickname the vine that ate the South. And today, at least 13 states classify it as an illegal noxious weed banned from import, sale, or intentional cultivation. Under ideal summer conditions, the vine can extend up to a foot in a single day, its aggressive growth allowing a single planting to smother native trees, power lines, and abandoned buildings within just a few seasons of unchecked spread. The plant climbs and sprawls using long, trailing vines that can stretch 100 feet from a single root crown. Its large, 3-part compound leaves and fragrant, grape-scented purple flower clusters covering entire hillsides across the American South in a thick, uniform green blanket. Despite originally being promoted and even subsidized by federal agricultural programs as a cover crop through the 1930s and 40s, the same government reversed course decades later once the plant's uncontrollable spread became impossible to ignore, and it was formally added to the federal noxious weed list before individual states began imposing their own cultivation bans. Damage estimates tied to kudzu now run into the hundreds of millions of dollars annually across the region, a striking outcome for a plant the government itself once actively encouraged homeowners and farmers to plant. Individual states enforce their bans differently, with some prohibiting only the sale and import of live plants, while others extend the restriction to seeds as well.